Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, brothers and sisters, to another installment of our light study of selected Ahadeeth from Riyaadus Saaliheen. And we, for the past 2 weeks, have been in the chapter of watchfulness and studying the Ahadeeth related to this great act of worship and this great manifestation of the Islamic character. And as always, before we go on to the subsequent chapter, we like to kind of recap and talk about in a little bit more detail some of the points and some of the lessons that we learned from the chapter. And so we'll be doing that today for the chapter of watchfulness. So when we first started out talking about watchfulness and just kind of like talking about what it means and some of the important things to pay attention to as it relates to watchfulness, we talked about how there's no adequate translation there's no adequate word-for-word translation for this word or this term in English. And the closest translation that we provided or were able to provide and what people have commonly used to translate the word is watchfulness. And we said that this watchfulness does not do justice to the term itself in Arabic, al-muraqaba. And we said that the word al-muraqaba encompasses the meanings of adoring love, reverential fear, mindfulness, attentiveness, and many more things. That basically none of these words by itself can express the meaning of watchfulness or al-muraqaba, I'm sorry. But when you put them all together, they convey the intended meaning. Then after that, we talked about how al-muraqaba, watchfulness, can be viewed from two perspectives. One perspective is min af'alillah, that it is an action and one of the qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ever watchful and aware of all that his creatures think, say, and do. Allah is watching us. Allah is watchful. So muraqabatullah, the meaning of it in this sense is that Allah is the fa'il. Allah is the one who is watching. And we find this repeatedly mentioned in the Quran, even in the Hadith. So for example, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَلَمْ تَعْلَمْ أَنَّ اللَّهَ يَعْلَمُ مَا فِي السَّمَوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ مَا يَكُونُ مِن نَجْوَى ثَلَاثَةٍ إِلَّا هُوَ رَابِعُهُمْ وَلَا خَمْسَةٍ إِلَّا هُوَ سَادِسُهُمْ وَلَا أَدْنَى مِن ذَلِكَ وَلَا أَكْثَرَ إِلَّا هُوَ مَعَهُمْ أَيْنَمَا كَانُوا ثُمَّ يُنَبِّئُهُم بِمَا عَمِلُوا يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٌ. So he says in this verse that, are you not aware that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows all that is in the heavens and the earth? There is not a gathering of 3 people except that he is the 4th, and not a gathering of 5 people except that he is the 6th, and not a gathering which is larger or smaller in number except that he is with them wherever they may be. With them how? With them physically? No, with them in terms of his what? His hearing and seeing, watching them and recording what they do, well aware of what they do. And if they're believers and they're doing good, he's also with them in terms of what? His moral support and his aid, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inna Allah bi kulli shay'in alim. Allah is certainly aware of all things. He also told Musa and Harun when he sent them to preach to Fir'aun and to ask for the liberation of Bani Israel, he told them, Inni ma'akuma asma'u wa ara. He said, I am with you, I hear and see. I'm with you hearing and seeing. In terms, it means I'm with you in terms of what? My hearing and sight. Not physically with you, but I'm with you in terms of what? I see everything that's going to happen, and I hear everything that's going to happen, and I'm also supporting you with what? With my power, my will, my might, etc. So, al-muhim, al-muraqabatullah, one of the meanings of it, or it can be looked at from one perspective, one angle, and that is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watchful. Allah is watching us. The other angle, the other perspective is min af'al al-ibad. It is from our actions, an act that we perform. We, the servants of Allah, remain conscious and mindful of the ever-presence of Allah's knowledge, of the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching us and well aware, not only of what we say and do, but also what we think and what we believe in our hearts. Now, this is critical because we are watching out for Allah and mindful that Allah is watching us, and that is the second perspective of being watchful. Min af'al al-ibad, from our actions. We watch Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning that we call to mind the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching, and therefore we are careful what we say, what we do, and make sure that whatever we say and do and what we believe is in line with what pleases Him. طيب, al-muraqabah can also be said to have two levels, right? To consist of two levels. And the first level is that we comport ourselves as if we see Allah. We comport ourselves as if we actually see Allah. Just like one of us, meaning that we behave in a way, we behave like a person would behave if he's doing a task and someone he loves and admires and wants to impress is watching. So we behave and comport ourselves as if we see Allah. The second level, and this level is lower than the first level. The first level is superior. The second level is that we comport ourselves as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees us. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We comport ourselves realizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees us and is watching us. And this level, again, as we said, is lower than the first level. And both of these levels and both of these perspectives are supported by the Hadith of Jibreel, which is the first Hadith cited by Nawawi in the chapter of Watchfulness. That's the Hadith where he asked the Prophet Jibreel alayhi salam. He asked the Prophet alayhi salam. He said, "Akhbirni an al-ihsan." Tell me about, inform me about al-ihsan, which we have translated as religious exceptionalism, the height, the summit, the peak of religious commitment. How can a person achieve that? How can a person achieve perfection in worship? Worship Allah in the most perfect way, shape, form, manner, etc. And the Prophet replied, he said, "I'bud Allah ka'annaka tarah, fa in lam takun tarahu fa innahu yarak." He said, worship Allah as if you see Him. And if you cannot reach this level, if you cannot see Him, then recognize that He sees you. And that hadith, it informed us, or it taught us, that watchfulness is actually a synonym for al-ihsan, religious exceptionalism. They are synonyms for each other. They are one and the same, right? And the highest level of religious commitment that a Muslim can achieve is when he worships Allah as if he sees Him. And if he can't do that, the next highest level, or the lower level in terms of superiority, is worshiping Allah, realizing and recognizing that He sees you. The Hadith of Jibreel also taught us that we as Muslims should strive for perfection. We should strive for perfection in everything that we do. Strive for perfection and care about the accuracy and correctness of the acts of worship we perform. And that's what we understand from when the Prophet said, "I'bud Allah ka'annaka tarah, fa in lam takun tarahu fa innahu yarak." He said, worship Allah as if you see Him, meaning hubban fil isaba, meaning you worship Allah, loving that you worship Him in a way that is going to please and impress Him, that is going to earn you His pleasure. Hubban fil isaba. Like we said, this first and higher and superior level of al-ihsan is when we worship Allah like a person doing a task knowing that someone he admires and respects and looks up to is watching. And so we're worshiping Allah as if we see Him, meaning what? Hubban fil isaba. Loving, hoping, desiring that we do it right and do it correctly and do it perfectly. So what? So that He is pleased, so that He is satisfied, so that He is impressed, right? And so obviously the end outcome is al-ihsan, perfection. Your worship is going to be what? It's going to be perfect. Why? Because you're trying to do it so well and so perfectly that it'll please Allah, it'll impress Allah, it'll earn you His praise. طيب. The second level is فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ. Worship Him, realizing that He sees you, خوفا في الخطأ, right? Fearing that you'll make a mistake that'll earn you His what? That'll earn you His blame, His censure, His displeasure, right? And again, because you fear making a mistake, you'll be very meticulous, and again, your worship will be perfect. And so in both cases, the end result will be what? Perfection. So when a person has al-muraqabah, it will lead to what? Al-ihsan. It will lead to perfection. And this is something that we as Muslims should be striving for. All right? The second thing that shows that is the fact that the Prophet mentioned it as a part of the religion, ascending in ascending order: Muslim, Mu'min, Muhsin, right? Tell me about Islam, tell me about Iman, tell me about Ihsan. And he put it at what? The height, the pinnacle, the peak. It's a part of the religion. And he put it as the highest level for a reason. So Muslims would do what? Would strive for that. Would strive for that. And even if they don't achieve it, as they say, shoot for the moon, if you don't reach it, you'll land amongst what? Amongst the stars. You'll still be at a level of religious commitment because you strive for that highest level. You'll be at a level of religious commitment that will definitely earn you Allah's pleasure and spare you His punishment. Then another thing that we learned from our discussions about watchfulness and the hadith that we learned that relate to this topic was the reward for watchfulness is Jannah, is paradise, and seeing the face of Allah in the hereafter. And we mentioned the ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لِلَّذِينَ أَحْسَنُوا الْحُسْنَى وَزِيَادَةً. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, for those who practice this ihsan, practice this watchfulness, right? They worship Allah on this level, at this, to this degree, to this extent. For them as al-husna, they will have what? They will have good, and that's paradise. We said al-husna in this ayah refers to what? Paradise. Allah is promising paradise for the people who develop this quality and observe this character, this Islamic character of watchfulness, right? Waziyada. And more than that. And the more, as the Prophet mentioned in the hadith, is seeing the face of Allah Azza wa Jal in the hereafter. And so this is what we stand to gain. This is the reward if we can practice and inculcate and embody this quality and character of being watchful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another thing we learned is that the quality of watchfulness should accompany, the quality of watchfulness should accompany us wherever we go. Regardless of the space. Regardless of the time and space in which we find ourselves, we as Muslims should be ever watchful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah Azza wa Jal. There is no time and no space in which we should put down, right? Put down watchfulness, set it aside. As the Prophet said in the hadith of Mu'adh, which is one of the hadith that we studied, the hadith in which he told Mu'adh as he was going, sending him off to Al-Yemen, to a non-Muslim land at that time, he told him, ittaqillah haythuma kunt. Fear Allah, be watchful of Allah, be ever vigilant regarding your religion. Be ever observant of your religious principles. Maintain your religious integrity wherever you may be, regardless of the circumstances. Ya Mu'adh. And so this is important because we as Muslims, we as a Muslim minority here in America, may be tempted to follow the philosophy that says, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And basically start to compromise our religious principles and to betray our religious integrity. We may be tempted to do that. We may even feel pressured to do that. But this hadith is telling us, remain watchful. Don't think that you can set watchfulness aside and that you can start to ignore the fact that Allah is watching. That you can allow yourself to descend from the level of worshiping Allah as if you see Him. Because why? Because of where you are. No matter where you are, you should maintain your vigilance and remain watchful and mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We also learned from the hadith of Ibn Abbas that if we are watchful of Allah, if we do this, is another incentive for us to be watchful of Allah, and that is that if we're watchful of Allah, Allah will watch out for us. Allah will watch out for us. Allah will protect us and look after us. The hadith says, احفظ الله يحفظك. احفظ الله تجده أمامك. تعرف على الله تعرف إلى الله في الرخاء يعرفك في الشدة. Right? يعرفك في الشدة. He said, safeguard Allah. And we said the meaning of safeguard Allah is basically be watchful of Allah. Be mindful of Allah. Safeguard Allah and He will safeguard you. He will look after you. He will protect you. Right? Safeguard Allah and you will find Him in front of you. Know Allah in prosperity. Allah will know you in adversity. Know Allah in the good times. Allah will know you in the bad times. All of that goes back to what? Being watchful, being vigilant. And we talked about how this being vigilant, based upon this hadith, it procures for us a safeguarding from Allah in a material sense. He'll safeguard us physically, safeguard our persons, safeguard physically the people that we love. He will safeguard our wealth, safeguard our property, right? But we said also, which is more important, he will safeguard us spiritually. This is so important, that if Allah leaves us to our own selves, right? Leaves us to on our own recognizance and entrusts us to try to make our way in this world, following his religion and not straying. If Allah doesn't guide us and protect us from going astray, we'll go astray. It's going to happen. And so when the Prophet said, Ihfadillah yahfadak, safeguard Allah, Allah will safeguard you. Be vigilant, be watchful, be mindful of Allah, and he will look out for you. It doesn't just mean material, it also means spiritually. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will place a barrier between us and anything that might corrupt our faith and cloud our judgment, cloud our religious judgment. Cause us to see truth as falsehood and falsehood as truth. Allah will protect us from that. Why? How? By being watchful of him. By being the people who worship him as if we see him. And if we can't do that, at least we worship him realizing that he sees us. We also said that when the Prophet said, Ihfadillah tajiduhu amamak, safeguard Allah and you will find him in front of you, it means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be with you in every single situation like a shield. Like a shield. Think about it, brothers and sisters. If Allah is with you, who can be against you? Who can be against you? Who can harm you if Allah is shielding you from their harm? If he's surrounding you with his protection. If he is aiding you against your enemies and foiling their plots. Making their plots against you come to naught. Right? He will grant you good fortune. He will make you successful in your endeavors. He will guide you to what is right in all your affairs. And there are people, some of us maybe are living this experience, or we know people who are living this experience where they have committed themselves to being faithful and doing the right thing and living right. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been there for them and got them out of difficult situations. And there have been impossible circumstances that they faced. People say, there's no way you're going to get out of this mess. And they get out of it. Why? Because they're so committed. Because they're so vigilant. Because they're so obedient. Because they worship Allah as if they see him, or at the very least realizing that he sees them. And so another thing that we learned from the series of Ahadeeth is this hadith has also exposed the fallacy that we find propagated by non-Muslims, obviously, but even some Muslims, liberal Muslims, will tell us that when it comes to religion, less is more. That basically they tell the religious people, the highly committed people, that they're taking their religion too seriously, that they're going overboard, that they are exhausting themselves unnecessarily, right? That if they just basically do the bare minimum, or a little bit more than the bare minimum, that's sufficient. That's more than enough, right? And that we don't need to be taxing ourselves and also denying ourselves many of the benefits of this world, because we are being so committed that our commitment comes between us, or serves as a barrier between us and many of the fruits and many of the good things of this worldly life. And so we said that we have to ask ourselves a question. When somebody tells us that or implies that, we have to ask ourselves a question. When they say less religion is more. More what? Is it more of what matters? Because this hadith, a hadith which came to us from a Sadiq al-Masduq, Sadiq, the one who always spoke the truth, never said anything false, al-Masduq, who everything that was told to him, including this hadith, was truthful, right? He was never lied to by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Sadiq al-Masduq, the Prophet Muhammad is telling us that the more religious we are, the more committed we are, the more blessings we will get from Allah. The more protection we'll get, the more safeguarding we will get, the more he will help us in our endeavors and put a barrier between us and losing our faith, etc. Just the Prophet is just piling on and telling us all the benefits and blessings we stand to gain. From what? From being more religious. So this is refuting the idea that when it comes to religion, less is more. Unless the person means more of the dunya. Certainly, if a person compromises their religious principles and betrays their religious integrity, and they do things that are haram because they will benefit in this world, yeah, they'll get more dunya. But what will be the end result in the hereafter? What will be the end result as it relates to their deen? If we are saying that the deen is what's most important to us, the deen is what matters, then we have to understand when it comes to seeking the benefits and blessings in the hereafter, and even the benefits and blessings, the truly beneficial things in this world, then more religion means what? Means more of those things. As the Prophet said in this hadith, the hadith of Ibn Abbas. But through that, we also learned that there is a standard for al-muraqabah. That the muraqabah, how much is enough? How much is too much? Answering that question is not something which is relative. It's not something which is up to me. It's not something that's up to you. It's something that is determined. It's been predetermined. There's a standard that's been set. And we need to try to meet that standard. And we learned that from the hadith, or the athar, the statement of Anas ibn Malik, who was speaking to some people who were in the time in which he lived, long after the passing of the Prophet ﷺ, when people had begun to change. And they had begun to deviate in terms of practicing certain heresies, certain innovations, and also deviate in terms of their moral character, that they started to engage in certain immoral activities. So Anas was basically admonishing them in that athar, and he said, إِنَّكُمْ لَتَعْلَمُونَ أَعْمَالًا هِيَ أَدَقُّ فِي أَعْيُنِكُمْ مِنَ الشَّعْرِ كُنَّا نَعُدُّهَا عَلَى عَهْدِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ مِنَ الْمُوبِقَاتِ. He said that you people of this time, you are doing things that in your mind they are very trivial. They're insignificant. They're as insignificant as what? As a hair, a strand of hair. To you, you're like, what's the big deal, right? كُنَّا نَعُدُّهَا عَلَى عَهْدِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ. But these same actions that you guys are doing, we, the companions of Muhammad, used to consider these deeds from al-mubiqat, from the very egregious acts or deeds and highly punishable deeds, right? We used to consider these from what? From the major sins, basically. So now this is significant because what is Anas telling us in a roundabout way? That our level of muraqabah, our level of vigilance, our level of religious commitment is the standard. Why? Because Allah said about us, the companions of Muhammad, what He didn't say about anybody who came after us. He made us the standard. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? He says, فَإِنْ آمَنُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا آمَنْتُمْ بِهِ فَقَدْ اهْتَدَوْا. He says, if those who come after you, meaning the companions, those who come after the companions, the succeeding generations, if they believe the way you, the companions of Muhammad, believe, then they're guided. The scholars of Islam said the opposite meaning is also intended. If they don't believe the way they believe, if we don't believe the way they believe, we've gone astray. He also said in the other ayah, he said, السابقون الأولون من المهاجرين والأنصار والذين تبعوهم بإحسان رضي الله عنهم ورضوا عنه. He said those forerunners, the first and foremost to accept Islam from the muhajirin, the immigrants, and the ansar, the helpers, right? وَالَّذِينَ تَبَعُهُمْ بِإِحْسَانٍ. Allah is pleased with them, and He'll also be pleased with those who came after them. رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ وَرَضُوا عَنْهُ. Allah will also be pleased with those who came after them if they follow those first Muslims, the early Muslims, bi-ihsan, in the best way. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made Him being pleased with us conditional, predicated on us following in the footsteps of the early Muslims and treating them as the gold standard, right? When it comes to religious matters. And so Anas is just echoing what Allah said, that the standard has been set. And we as Muslims who come after the companions need to follow what? We need to try to meet that standard. As it relates to all things, specifically here, al-muraqabah, religious exceptionalism, vigilance, mindfulness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a couple of points here that we can take from that athar, and I want to mention those ala ujala. The first one is that when it comes to religious matters, generally speaking, the companions of Allah's Messenger are the gold standard. So we must measure ourselves by them, not by our own standards or those of our contemporaries. We need to stop saying everybody's doing it. Well, everybody's doing this. Well, you brother, you know we're not supposed to be doing it. Well, everybody's doing it. We need to stop doing that. We need to stop setting our standards so low that if other people do something and we know it's wrong, we're told it's wrong, The evidence is provided for us showing this wrong. Our answer will be, well, everybody else is doing it. We make our standard for vigilance what other people are doing who are impious. No. Our standard is the companions of Muhammad ﷺ, as Anas alluded to in this athar. Also, just because we think a matter is not a sin, or that it's a minor sin, or it's of little significance, it's trivial, that doesn't mean that it is. We have to stop making ourselves the yardstick. The Quran, the Sunnah, and the understanding of the companions, that's the yardstick, that's the standard. That's how we determine if something is minor or major, a big deal or not a big deal. And that's what Anas is alluding to when he says, كُنَّا نَعُدُّهَا عَلَى أَهْدِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ مِنَ الْمُوبِقَاتِ. We consider these types of things during the time of the Prophet ﷺ from the major sins and highly punishable deeds. Last but not least, I want to close by saying that another thing that we learned from our study of the chapter of watchfulness is that true wisdom and watchfulness go hand in hand. True wisdom and watchfulness go hand in hand. And we mentioned the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Kayyis man dana nafsahu wa amila lima ba'da al-maut wal-ajiz man atba'a nafsahu hawah man atba'a nafsahu hawaha wa tamanna ala Allah. He said that the intelligent person, the smart person, the wise person from the Islamic perspective is the one who surrenders himself to his religion, right? He lowers himself to be a follower of the deen of Allah. وَعَمِلَ لِمَا بَعْدَ الْمَوْتِ. And he works for the hereafter. He puts the hereafter he puts the hereafter in his sights and doesn't take his eyes off the prize. I'm trying to get to Jannah, I'm trying to get to paradise, and I'm going to do the deeds I need to do to get there. That's the person who's what? Wise in Islam, from the Islamic perspective. Wal-ajiz, the foolish person, the person who has no wisdom whatsoever, is the one who atba nafsahu hawaha, the one who surrenders himself to his desires. وَتَمَنَّ عَلَى اللَّهِ. And he wants to get something from Allah that he hasn't earned. He hopes to receive, wa alaykum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. He wants to receive something, he expects to receive something from Allah that he hasn't earned. That's the person who's what? He's foolish. Now what I want to say on this point in closing is that this hadith from the Prophet is teaching us that the carefree intellectual is foolish, not wise. This is important. Why? Because we live in a time where we have too many carefree intellectuals, liberal intellectuals, people who they portray themselves and project themselves and promote themselves as being very what? Smart generally and also smart religiously. Very well educated in terms of religious matters, and they put themselves forward as knowing the deen inside and out. But those same people are very what? Carefree when it comes to what? The religion. And they actually legalize things that are clearly illegal in the religion of Allah. And they actually make little or make light and belittle those prohibitions, those Islamic teachings of right and wrong. If they don't like it, if they don't agree with it, it's silly, it's foolish. Come on, we're in the 21st century. Let's basically get with the program. Let's get with the times, etc. So brothers and sisters, this is important. If we study this hadith, this final hadith that we took from the bab of al-muraqabah, we have to understand that when we see people, especially public figures and religious leaders, people who call themselves, or other people call them, imams, sheikhs, du'at, preachers, Muslim evangelicals, whatever it is. They're heads of organizations, heads of masajid, they have their own institutes, whatever it is. If these people teach us implicitly or explicitly that it's okay to leap before we look, do whatever comes natural, do what makes you feel good in your religion, if it makes you feel good, istafti qalbak. What do you feel? What does your heart tell you? If your heart tells you to do something, you feel it's right, you feel it's okay, then you do it. And then later on, if it turns out that it's wrong, that you shouldn't have been doing that thing that you did is actually a major sin, it's actually an act of kufr, an act of disbelief, something to take you out the fold of Islam, then what? Oh well, Allah is forgiving and merciful. Allah knows your intention. It doesn't matter what you did if your heart was in the right place. If we have public figures who are teaching us this, they are violating this hadith. They're living in contradiction to this hadith. They're teaching in contradiction to the words of Rasulullah. Al-Kayyis man dana nafsahu wa amil lima ba'da al-maut. The one who really has wisdom, the one you really should listen to, the true Islamic intellectual, is the one who humbles himself, surrenders himself to his religion. The religion is the boss. I look before I leap. What does the religion say? That's what I do. That's the wise person. وَعَمِلْ لِمَا بَعْدَ الْمَوْتِ. And he works for the hereafter. Puts the hereafter square in his sights. That's his focus. That's his aim. That's what he's striving for day in and day out. Grinding for what? For the hereafter. But if this person is the opposite of that, this public figure, then we have to realize that this public figure or these public figures, they lack the wisdom and competency required to lead and serve in the position they hold. Why? Because they don't have wisdom according to the definition of the Prophet. And his definition of what matters. Al-Kayyis man dana nafsahu. Al-Kayyis, the truly wise person, is one who what? Who surrenders himself to his religion. Follows his religion, makes his religion his guide. Not the one who puts the religion behind his back, does whatever he wants to do, and then if it comes to him, hey, you weren't supposed to do that, that's not right. Oh, well, Allah Ghafur Rahim, Allah Kareem. So with that, brothers and sisters, we've completed our review, our recap of the chapter of Watchfulness, Bab al-Muraqabah from Riyaadus Saaliheen. And inshallah ta'ala, we'll meet again tomorrow, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us life. We'll be looking at the next chapter in the hadith, in Riyaadus Saaliheen, inshallah ta'ala. Until then, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as always to bless you, to bless your houses, to bless your spouses, to bless your children, your wives, bless your rizq, bless your provisions, bless your health, and make you blessed wherever you may be. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from those who listen to the talk and follow the best of it. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from those who He teaches beneficial knowledge. And who truly benefits from that knowledge by making us from those who put it into practice. Hada wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala Nabi Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.